story contains complex conflicts and sensitive situations. Viewer discretion is advised.
The ER nurse read the dosage out loud while typing, and it wasn't the number printed on the bottle in my kitchen cabinet. It was a Thursday night in early March, just after 9. I remember the digital clock above the nurse's station because I kept staring at it, trying to hold on to something steady. The overhead lights in the emergency department at Wake Med in Raleigh were too bright, flattening everything into sharp edges. My hands were trembling not from panic, but from whatever had just happened in my apartment an hour earlier. I had taken my migraine medication the way I always did. Same time, same routine. I keep it in a small basket on the top shelf beside the coffee mugs, away from heat and moisture. I work in marketing for a regional construction firm, and I live alone. My routines are predictable because they have to be. Chronic migraines don't give you much room for improvisation. By the time the paramedics arrived, my speech was slightly slurred, and my vision felt delayed, like my eyes were a fraction of a second behind the room. I remember sitting on my own couch trying to answer their questions clearly. I remember saying the name of the medication and the dosage. I was sure of it. In triage, the nurse asked for my prescription information. Before I could reach for my phone to pull up the pharmacy app, my sister Claire stepped closer to the counter. She's been under a lot of stress, she said. I'm not sure she's been tracking it carefully. Claire is 34, confident in the way people are when they're used to being listened to. She sells high-end homes in North Hills and carries herself like she's always in a meeting. She had driven behind the ambulance after I called her from the living room floor because I didn't trust myself to stay steady long enough to explain everything twice. The nurse turned back to me. Do you know the strength? I told her the number. I have been on the same dose for almost a year. She typed it in, then paused. Our record from intake says this refill was a different strength. I shook my head. That didn't make sense. The refill had been picked up 2 days ago. I remember the notification from the pharmacy on Tuesday afternoon. I remember thinking I would grab it on my way home from work. Claire leaned in again. She's been mixing things up lately, she said gently. That's why I told her I could help. I felt that sentence settle in the room. Not dramatic, not loud. Just enough to shift how I was being heard. The attending physician came in after labs were drawn. He explained that the blood concentration levels didn't quite align with what I reported taking. Not dangerously high, not catastrophic, just inconsistent. He asked whether there had been any recent changes in dosage. I said no. I could hear my own voice steady but thinner than usual. I wasn't confused. I wasn't experimenting. I hadn't doubled anything. I had followed the instructions printed on the label sitting in my cabinet at home. The physician made a note in my chart. I watched his pen move. I've learned over the years that what gets written down matters more than what feels true in the moment. While we waited for imaging to come back clear, Claire sat in the chair beside my bed, scrolling through her phone. Every so often, she would look up and smile at me in a way that suggested reassurance. When the nurse returned to confirm my medication history, Claire answered again before I could. She gets overwhelmed, she said. Sometimes she forgets what she's taken. The nurse nodded and typed. I lay there listening to the quiet beeping of the monitor attached to my finger. I have managed my health carefully for years. I track my appointments. I refill on time. I set reminders. I don't improvise with prescription medication. But in that room with my lab values flagged and my sister speaking for me, I felt something else happening alongside the medical evaluation. My reliability was being assessed. When the discharge summary was printed just before midnight, I asked to see it. Under medications, the listed strength matched what the ER had on record from intake, not what I believed was in my cabinet. I didn't argue. I was still tired, still slightly unsteady. I signed where they asked me to sign. On the ride back to my apartment, Claire kept her tone light. She suggested I might have been distracted. She mentioned how busy work has been for me lately. She said it happens to everyone. I nodded and watched the streetlights pass. But as soon as I stepped back into my kitchen and looked at the bottle on the shelf, I knew one of two things had to be true. Either I had lost control of something I have managed responsibly for years, or the chart in that ER was telling a story that didn't start with me. I did not sleep much after we left the hospital. By Friday morning, the apartment felt unfamiliar in a quiet way, as if something inside it had shifted while I was gone. I stood at the kitchen counter with the discharge summary folded beside me and the prescription bottle in my hand. The label was clean and clear, my name, the medication name, a strength printed in bold. I read it twice, then compared it to the strength listed on the ER paperwork. They were not the same. The difference was not subtle. It wasn't a smudge or a misread decimal. It was a different dosage entirely. I checked the fill date. Tuesday, 2 days earlier. I remembered the notification on my phone during a mid-afternoon meeting. I had been sitting in a conference room reviewing a campaign draft when the pharmacy alert popped up. I remember silencing it and planning to stop by after work. I had never actually picked it up. The bottle in my hand was sealed, the safety cap intact. Nothing about it looked unusual. If I hadn't seen the ER chart, I would have assumed everything was correct. I set the bottle down and opened the pharmacy app on my phone. The refill status showed dispensed. There was no note about delivery, no reminder to collect it. It was marked complete. That meant someone had picked it up. Claire's comment from the night before replayed in my mind. She had said she offered to help. I had taken that as general concern. Now it landed differently. I walked into the living room and opened my work laptop. My job requires careful tracking of timelines and approvals. I pulled up my calendar from Tuesday. The afternoon block from 3 to 5 was a client strategy session held in person at our office downtown. I had scanned my badge at the building entrance at 2:58. The system logs those entries automatically. If the medication was dispensed Tuesday afternoon, it had not been to me. There was a small practical detail that unsettled me more than the dosage difference. The pharmacy where I fill this prescription requires photo ID for pickup. They had told me that when I first started the medication. No ID, no release. I went back into the kitchen and turned the bottle over in my hand. The pharmacy sticker was applied straight, nothing peeling at the edges. It looked exactly like every other refill I had ever collected myself. I opened the cabinet and pulled down the empty bottle from the previous month, the one I had finished a few days earlier. I set the two side by side, same pharmacy, same formatting, only the strength differed. My head felt clear now, no slurring, no delayed vision, just a steady awareness that something had happened between the moment the prescription was filled and the moment I ended up in the ER. Around 10, Claire sent a message asking how I felt. She suggested again that I might want to let her handle things for a while at least, until I felt more stable. I did not respond right away. Instead, I took a photo of the current bottle, then of the discharge summary, showing the listed strength from the hospital record. I placed both on the counter and made sure the dates were visible in the frame. If I had mismanaged my medication, there would be an explanation I could trace. But if I hadn't, then the explanation would have to exist somewhere else. By noon, I knew the next step wasn't another conversation at the kitchen table. It was the pharmacy. The pharmacy call took less than 5 minutes, but it changed the shape of what I was dealing with. It was Friday afternoon, a little after 2, when I stepped out of my office building and walked to a quieter spot along the sidewalk. I didn't want to do it from my desk with coworkers passing behind me. And I didn't want to do it from my apartment where every object had started to feel like it was part of the question. The pharmacy was the same chain I'd used for years, a location on Falls of Noose Road that kept my refills predictable. The automated menu asked me to confirm my date of birth and address, then put me on hold. I listened to the music with the kind of attention people give to small sounds when they're waiting for something they don't want to hear. When the technician came on, I asked for my dispense history for the migraine medication. I kept my voice even and simple. I said I needed the dates and pickup information for the last few months. She didn't hesitate. She told me she could print it, but she would need to verify I was the patient. I answered the security questions, then asked if she could email it or if I needed to come in. She said I would need to come in for a printed copy or have it mailed. That was normal. It was also inconvenient in a way that suddenly mattered. I told her I would come in after work. Before we hung up, I asked one more thing as casually as I could. I asked whether the Tuesday pickup had been completed in person. There was a pause. Not dramatic, but enough to signal she was looking at something on her screen. Yes, she said. It shows picked up. I asked if it showed who signed. Another pause. It's an electronic signature, she said. It's under your name. The sidewalk felt less steady under my feet. I looked up at the sky and tried to keep my breathing normal. I told her I hadn't picked it up. I said that clearly without adding an explanation that would make it sound like a family problem. I asked whether the system recorded a time. She gave me the timestamp, Tuesday, 4:26. 4:26 was not a fuzzy part of my day. At 4:26, I had been in our second-floor conference room with 2 project managers and a client on speakerphone. The meeting invitation was still on my calendar. My notes were still open on my laptop. I didn't tell her all that. I just asked if the record showed anything else. An ID check, a note, a delivery. She said she couldn't see details beyond what the screen displayed, but the status was clear. The medication had been dispensed and picked up. After I hung up, I stood there longer than I needed to phone, still pressed against my ear, even though the call had ended. The moment I put it down, I knew my next step would be to retrieve something I could hold in my hand. Something printed, something that didn't depend on anyone believing me. Back inside, I returned to my desk and worked through the rest of the afternoon the way I always did. Emails, a revision request, a call with a vendor. It was all normal, which made the other thing feel sharper. At 5:30, I drove to the pharmacy. The parking lot was busy, the kind of end-of-week rush where people pick up medications and groceries with the same tired efficiency. I stood in line behind an older man with a cane and a woman with 2 small children tugging at her coat. When it was my turn, I gave my name and asked for the printout. The technician recognized my name from the call. She slid a single sheet across the counter with the refill history listed in a clean table. Dates, medication name, quantity, status. My eyes went straight to Tuesday. There it was again, dispensed, picked up. 4:26, electronic signature on file. I traced the line with my fingertip as if that could change it. The technician asked if everything looked right. I told her no. I told her that I had not picked it up. She looked past me toward the pharmacist, then back at the screen. Her expression didn't turn dramatic. It turned careful. She said she would need the pharmacist to speak with me. A few minutes later, the pharmacist came to the counter. He didn't raise his voice or make promises. He asked me to confirm my address again. He asked whether anyone else had access to my account. I said my sister was listed as an emergency contact, not a pickup proxy, and that I lived alone. He nodded once, as if filing that away. He said they would need to review the transaction record, and that if there had been an unauthorized pickup, it was serious. He asked if I wanted them to place a note on my profile, requiring photo ID every time. I told him yes. On the drive home, the paper sat on the passenger seat, where I could see it whenever I glanced over. A simple printout, a single line at 4:26 on Tuesday, and the quiet fact that someone had moved through my life under my name. I didn't know yet how, and I didn't know yet who could explain it, but I knew the story had left my kitchen cabinet behind. It was in the record now. The pharmacist called me late Monday morning. I had been at my desk for less than an hour working through a vendor contract when my phone buzzed with the pharmacy's number. I stepped into the hallway outside our office suite before answering. He said they had reviewed the transaction from Tuesday. The pickup had been processed at the counter, not through the drive-thru. The system showed an override under something labeled Family Authorization on file. I asked what that meant. He explained that if a patient had previously listed someone for pickup privileges, the technician could note that and proceed without scanning a new ID each time. The record would still reflect the patient's name, but the override would appear in the internal log. He told me the technician who processed it had marked that box. I did not remember ever signing a pickup authorization for anyone. The pharmacist said the electronic signature captured at 4:26 did not include an image of a physical ID, only a notation tied to the override. He said they would need to look further into whether that authorization had been properly documented. He kept his tone measured. No accusations, no assurances, just facts. After I hung up, I sat in the break room longer than necessary, watching the coffee machine cycle through another pot. I replayed my last few visits to the pharmacy. I had listed Claire as my emergency contact on a general intake form months ago when I updated my insurance. That was standard. It was not the same as granting pickup rights. At noon, I received a call from a woman who introduced herself as the store's compliance manager. She said they were conducting a review of the override notation and needed to confirm whether I had ever provided written consent for a third party to retrieve controlled medication on my behalf. I told her I had not. She asked if I lived alone. I said yes. She asked whether anyone else had access to my prescription profile online. I told her I was the only one with login credentials. She said the system would show whether any account changes had been made in recent weeks. She would review that as well. The questions were procedural, but their direction was clear. This was no longer a simple miscommunication about dosage strength. There was now a question about authorization and access. By mid-afternoon, an email arrived from the pharmacy's corporate compliance department acknowledging my inquiry and stating that an internal audit had been opened. It referenced the Tuesday transaction number and the override code used. Seeing the word audit attached to my medication felt disproportionate to what had started as a headache and a hospital visit. Later that evening, Claire stopped by my apartment without warning. I saw her car through the window before she knocked. She said she had spoken to the pharmacy to clear up confusion. She mentioned that she had been trying to help me stay organized. She implied that formal reviews would only complicate things. I told her the pharmacy had contacted me directly and that they were reviewing the override record. Her expression changed not dramatically, but enough for me to see that she had not expected that step. She asked if I had accused her of anything. I said I had not accused anyone. I had only confirmed that I did not authorize pickup. The conversation did not escalate, it narrowed. She left after a few minutes saying she hoped I wasn't overreacting. When the door closed, I realized something practical. If the pharmacy's internal log showed an override under family authorization, then somewhere in their system, my account had been tagged in a way I did not approve. That meant the issue extended beyond one incorrect bottle. It involved who could move through my medical record under my name. The next morning, I logged into my pharmacy profile and changed the password. I also removed Claire's contact information from the emergency section, leaving it blank for the first time in years. Those were small actions. They did not reverse what had already happened, but they made one fact unavoidable. Someone had been granted access inside a system that required consent, and I had not given it. By Wednesday morning, the pharmacy had not yet called back with anything conclusive. I took a half day off work and drove to my primary care clinic on Six Forks Road. I did not frame it as an emergency. I scheduled a same-week appointment online and selected medication question as the reason. It was the most neutral option available. The waiting room was quiet, mostly retirees flipping through magazines. I checked in at the desk and handed over my insurance card, the way I always did. Nothing about the front office reflected the fact that my medication history was now under review. When the nurse called my name, I brought the prescription bottle with me into the exam room. I set it on the counter beside the paper-covered exam table without commentary. She reviewed my chart first. The ER visit from Thursday night had already been uploaded into the system. The listed dosage from intake was visible there, tied to the lab results that showed inconsistent blood concentration. Then she picked up the bottle. She read the label once, then again more slowly. She asked if this was the medication I had been taking before the ER visit. I told her yes. I told her I had not changed doses. She turned the bottle over and checked the imprint on one of the tablets against a small reference guide on the wall-mounted computer. Her movements were deliberate, clinical. The imprint corresponded to a different strength than what my prescription in the chart authorized. She did not dramatize it. She documented it. She entered a note stating that the physical medication presented by the patient did not match the prescribed dosage listed in the electronic health record. She also recorded the ER lab discrepancy. She stepped out briefly and returned with my physician. He reviewed both entries side by side on the screen. The chart reflected one dosage. The bottle in front of us reflected another. The lab values from Thursday suggested a third pattern altogether. He asked whether I had allowed anyone else to retrieve my medication. I told him no. He nodded and added his own note confirming the mismatch and recommending that I discontinue the current bottle pending clarification from the dispensing pharmacy. He printed a summary for me to take home. When I left the clinic, I carried that document in a manila folder along with the pharmacy printout from Friday. 2 independent records now described the same inconsistency. That afternoon, I received another email from the pharmacy's compliance department, requesting confirmation in writing that I had not authorized third-party pickup. They attached a standard form asking me to affirm that no proxy consent had been granted. I read it twice. Signing it would do more than clarify a misunderstanding. It would formally contradict whatever family authorization on file notation had been used Tuesday at 4:26. I printed the form, signed it, and scanned it back to the address provided. There was nothing dramatic about the act. It took less than a minute, but it changed the direction of the situation. Up to that point, there had been room for assumption, a clerical mix-up, a miscommunication, a mistake in labeling. Once I signed that statement, the record no longer allowed for ambiguity about my consent. An hour later, my phone rang. Claire's voice was steady. She said she had received a call from someone at the pharmacy asking questions about authorization. She said it sounded serious and unnecessary. She said I should have spoken to her before escalating anything. I told her I had confirmed facts. Nothing more. She said that formal complaints create consequences people can't control. After the call ended, I placed the clinic summary, the dispense log, and a copy of the signed affirmation into the same folder. I did not yet know where the process would lead, but I understood something clearly for the first time. This was no longer about whether I had taken the wrong dose. It was about whether someone had acted under my name without my permission. And that question was now in writing. I submitted the complaint on Thursday afternoon. The North Carolina Board of Pharmacy website was plain and procedural, the kind of page designed to collect information without emotion. I filled out the online form from my dining table with the clinic summary, the dispense log, and the signed affirmation laid out in front of me. The form asked for dates, pharmacy location, prescription number, and a description of the concern. I entered Tuesday at 4:26. I entered the store address on Falls of Neuse Road. I described the dosage discrepancy between the bottle in my possession and the prescription in my medical record. I attached the ER summary and the clinic note confirming the mismatch. There was a checkbox asking whether I had attempted to resolve the issue directly with the pharmacy. I marked yes. At the bottom, I certified that the information was accurate to the best of my knowledge. I paused before clicking. Submit, not because I doubted the facts, but because I understood what a regulatory complaint does. It creates a record that moves beyond private conversation. Then I clicked. An automated confirmation email arrived within minutes with a case number and a notice that an investigator might contact me for additional documentation. The language was neutral. It did not assume fault. It did not promise outcome. After that, I opened the hospital's patient safety portal and filed a separate report. I noted that during intake at the ER, medication information had been accepted from a third party without direct verification from me, and that this information later conflicted with documented prescription records. I did not accuse my sister by name. I stated only what had occurred. By early evening, the weight of what I had done began to show itself in practical ways. Claire called. Her tone was controlled, but the topic had shifted. She said someone from the pharmacy's corporate office had reached out asking questions about authorization forms and account notes. She asked whether I had escalated this to the state. I said yes. There was a pause long enough to register. She said that once a complaint reaches a regulatory board, it triggers reviews that can affect licensing, employment records, and background checks. She said that misunderstandings can grow teeth when they enter systems. I told her that my medical record already reflected a dosage discrepancy, and that I had signed a statement confirming no authorization had been granted. She said I should have spoken to her before involving outside agencies. I told her I had spoken to the pharmacy and my physician. That was the sequence. The call ended without resolution. The next morning, an email from the board's office requested copies of the physical prescription bottle label and any written communication from the pharmacy regarding the override. The message included a direct line to an assigned investigator. I scanned the label and forwarded the prior emails from corporate compliance. I responded within the hour. Later that day, the pharmacy updated my account with a formal note requiring in-person ID verification for every controlled prescription pickup with no exceptions. The pharmacist called to inform me of the change. He also said that as part of their internal review, they would be interviewing staff who had worked the Tuesday shift. The situation was no longer confined to my kitchen or my inbox. It was now part of a review process that involved other employees' corporate oversight and a state board. That evening, my mother sent a message asking why the pharmacy had contacted Claire about an investigation. She wrote that these kinds of actions follow people longer than anyone expects. I did not answer immediately. Instead, I opened my folder again and checked that every document was dated and clearly labeled. The clinic note, the dispense log, the signed affirmation, the board confirmation email. Filing the complaint did not give me control over what would happen next. But it removed one option permanently. This was no longer something that could be smoothed over in a family conversation. It had entered the record. By the following Monday, the investigation had a rhythm of its own. I received a voicemail from the board investigator asking for clarification about the timeline between the ER visit and the Tuesday pickup. The tone was direct procedural. He requested that I confirm in writing the date and time I had been at work during the 4/26 transaction. I forwarded a copy of my calendar entry and a screenshot of my building badge log from our office security system. I did not editorialize. I attached and sent. An hour later, my mother called. She rarely calls during the workday unless something is wrong. Her voice was composed but tighter than usual. She said Claire had been contacted again this time, not just by the pharmacy, but by someone referencing the board case number. She asked me why I hadn't spoken to the family before taking it that far. I told her I had spoken to the pharmacy and my doctor. I had responded to their requests. The board contact followed from that. She said people in Claire's office were starting to hear about it, that when regulatory boards call employers for verification or background context, it creates assumptions. She asked whether I understood how that could affect Claire's standing with clients. That was the first time the stakes were framed as reputational in a professional setting. I told her I understood that investigations have consequences. I also understood that my medical record now reflected a dosage mismatch and a signed statement denying authorization. She said family matters should stay within the family. After the call, I noticed something new in my inbox. An email from our HR department asking whether I was comfortable confirming my work location last Tuesday afternoon for an external inquiry. It did not specify who had asked. It did not accuse. It simply requested verification. I walked down the hall to speak with our HR manager, Denise, rather than replying by email. She had worked at the company longer than I had and was known for handling things quietly. She told me the request had come from a state investigator, verifying my presence at the office during a specific time window. She said they needed confirmation that my badge entry record was accurate and that I had not left the building between 3 and 5. I confirmed that I had been in the conference room for the full meeting. Denise nodded and said they would respond formally to the inquiry. As I returned to my desk, the situation felt more exposed than before. My employer was now indirectly connected to a regulatory review involving my medication. That evening, Claire sent a message stating that her brokerage's compliance officer had scheduled a meeting with her regarding a pending state inquiry. She wrote that these processes have a way of expanding beyond their original scope. She asked whether I planned to pursue it further. I did not respond immediately. Instead, I logged into my pharmacy profile again and double-checked that no third-party contacts remained listed. I also requested a full copy of my prescription profile history, including any account changes in the last 90 days. Within minutes, an automated acknowledgement confirmed the request. The next morning, another email arrived from the pharmacy's compliance department. They informed me that during their review, they had identified an account flag indicating family authorization that had been added during a prior insurance update visit. They were investigating whether proper documentation supported that designation. The wording was careful. It did not assign blame, but it confirmed that my account had been altered at some point. By midday, Claire called again. She said the brokerage meeting was not optional. She said questions about authorization and misrepresentation could impact her licensing disclosures. She said that even if nothing formal resulted, the mere existence of an inquiry could affect client trust. She asked whether I would consider withdrawing the board complaint in light of the unintended consequences. I told her that once filed, the complaint was in the board's hands. There was a silence that lasted longer than any of our previous pauses. She said that if this continued, it would change things between us in ways that could not be undone. After we hung up, I sat at my dining table with the folder open again. The pages inside were orderly, dated, sequential. The pressure was no longer about whether the bottle matched the chart. It was about whether I would accept the cost of insisting that my medical record and my consent mattered more than family convenience. For the first time, I understood that the risk was not just administrative, it was relational. The first letter from the board arrived by certified mail the following Wednesday. I signed for it at my apartment door before work. The envelope was thick official stamped with the state seal. Inside was a notice confirming that a formal inquiry had been opened regarding unauthorized prescription release and improper account designation. It outlined the pharmacy's obligation to produce internal override record staff schedules from the Tuesday shift and documentation supporting any family authorization attached to my profile. It also stated that third parties named in the review could be contacted for statements. The language was direct, no conclusions, just scope. By mid-morning, I received a separate email from the pharmacy's corporate compliance department, informing me that the board had requested full cooperation and that they were conducting parallel internal interviews. They included a point of contact and asked me to preserve all related documentation. I forwarded the message to the investigator already assigned to my case confirming receipt. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. It was a state investigator introducing herself and confirming that she would be handling the inquiry going forward. She asked if I would be available the following week for a recorded statement. I agreed. She explained that their preliminary review suggested the family authorization flag had been added during a previous in-store insurance update, but they had not yet located a signed proxy form in the account file. That detail shifted something for me. The authorization had not appeared out of nowhere. It had been entered at a specific time by a specific employee under specific circumstances. After the call, I requested from the pharmacy a complete account activity log covering the date of my last insurance update appointment. I included the approximate month and asked whether any scanned documents were attached to my profile. By late afternoon, I received confirmation that the request was being processed. Meanwhile, Claire sent a short message stating that her brokerage's compliance meeting had concluded with instructions to provide written clarification about the inquiry and any potential regulatory exposure. She said they were reviewing her client files for disclosure obligations. The ripple effect had moved beyond conversation. It was now procedural on multiple fronts. That evening, I met with the board investigator at a small conference room inside a state office building downtown. The setting was understated. A table, 2 chairs, a digital recorder placed between us. She asked me to describe the sequence of events from the ER visit through the pharmacy override discovery. I kept my answers factual. Dates, times, documents submitted. I handed her copies of the clinic summary, the dispense log, and the corporate emails confirming the audit. She asked whether I believed the authorization had been intentionally misused. I said I could not speak to intent. I could only confirm that I had not granted it. She nodded and turned off the recorder. Before I left, she told me that if the pharmacy could not produce signed consent, the designation itself would be considered improper under state regulations. She said they were also reviewing whether similar overrides had occurred in other accounts. Walking back to my car, I felt a different kind of steadiness. The situation was no longer defined by private argument. It was being measured against written standards. The next morning, the pharmacy emailed me a scanned image from my account file, an insurance update form signed 6 months earlier. My signature appeared at the bottom, authorizing insurance verification and emergency contact listing. There was no line granting pickup proxy authority. Yet in the internal activity log attached to the email, the family authorization flag had been added that same day. That was the first time I saw the 2 entries side by side, a routine insurance update, and a system change expanding access beyond what I had signed. I forwarded the documents to the investigator with a brief note highlighting the date correlation. By then, I understood that this was no longer about proving I had been present at work on Tuesday. It was about establishing how access had been created in the first place. The review was not finished, but it had moved into a place where records, not relationships, would decide what happened next. The joint review meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at the pharmacy's regional office. I was not required to attend in person, but the investigator asked whether I would be available by phone in case clarification was needed. I said yes and kept my schedule clear. Around 10:30, my phone vibrated with a request to join the call. On the line were the state investigator, a representative from the board, the pharmacy's corporate compliance director, and their legal counsel. The conversation was structured recorded. The compliance director summarized their internal findings first. The family authorization flag had been added on the same date as my insurance update, but no signed proxy consent existed in the scanned documents. The employee who processed the update had marked the authorization field without attaching a supporting form. The investigator then reviewed the Tuesday transaction. The electronic signature captured at 4:26 did not include a scanned ID image. The system reflected a manual override based on the existing family authorization designation. Next, they referenced my ER record and clinic note, confirming that the medication strength in my possession did not match the prescription authorized in my electronic health record at the time of the refill. The documents were read into the record one by one. The compliance director acknowledged that under state regulations, proxy pickup for controlled medication requires explicit documented consent. Without it, the override should not have been used. There was a pause after that statement. The investigator asked whether any additional documentation existed that could substantiate authorization. The pharmacy's counsel said they had searched the account history and found none. I was asked to confirm again that I had not signed a pickup authorization form, beyond listing an emergency contact. I confirmed. Claire joined the call briefly at her counsel's request. Her voice was steady but less certain than it had been in earlier weeks. She stated that she believed she had been helping me manage refills during a busy period and had not intended to misrepresent anything. The investigator clarified that intent was separate from compliance. The question was whether proper authorization had been documented before the release of medication. There was no additional document presented. By the end of the meeting, the board representative stated that a formal finding would be issued regarding improper account designation and unauthorized release under state pharmacy rules. The pharmacy would be required to implement corrective measures, and the case would remain open pending final review. When the call ended, I sat at my desk without moving for several minutes. An email arrived shortly afterward from the board, summarizing the preliminary determination insufficient documentation to support family authorization. Improper override of identification protocol. Confirmed discrepancy between prescribed dosage and dispensed medication strength. The language was precise. Within hours, Claire texted that her brokerage had placed her under internal review pending the outcome of the board's final order. She said clients had been notified that she would be temporarily unavailable for new contracts. That was the first observable shift in her professional standing. I did not respond immediately. Instead, I forwarded the board summary to my primary care physician, so that my medical record would reflect the findings once finalized. I also requested from the pharmacy written confirmation that the incorrect authorization flag had been removed from my account. Later that afternoon, the pharmacy sent notice that the flag had been permanently deleted and that new safeguards had been implemented requiring scanned ID verification for any third-party pickup. The system that had once allowed an unchecked designation to stand was now altered. The confrontation had not been loud. It had been procedural, documented, and difficult to argue with. Claire called that evening. She said the review was damaging, that clients ask questions when they see compliance notices tied to a license number. She said none of this would have happened if we had resolved it privately. I told her that the documents spoke for themselves. After the call ended, I placed the board's summary into the same folder that had started with a hospital discharge sheet and a pharmacy printout. The pressure had shifted. It was no longer about whether I could prove where I was on Tuesday. It was about the consequences of a record that did not match the consent it claimed to represent. The final outcome had not yet been issued, but the direction was clear. The final order from the board was issued 6 weeks later. It arrived by email first, then by certified mail. The language was measured and specific. The pharmacy was cited for improper account designation and failure to obtain documented consent before permitting third-party pickup of a controlled prescription. A corrective action plan was mandated, including revised authorization procedures and mandatory staff retraining. The order also referenced the account change that had added the family authorization flag without supporting documentation. The board required written confirmation that the designation had been removed and that no further overrides would be permitted without signed proxy consent. There was no dramatic headline, no courtroom, just a formal conclusion entered into record. 2 days after the order was published, the pharmacy sent me a letter confirming that my profile had been corrected, that the authorization flag had been permanently deleted, and that updated safeguards were now active across all locations in the region. A week later, Claire called to say that her brokerage had concluded its internal review. She would remain licensed, but a compliance notation would stay in her file tied to the state inquiry. She had been instructed to complete additional ethics training and to disclose the review if asked during future background checks. Her voice sounded tired rather than defensive. She said she wished it had unfolded differently. I did not argue. I did not apologize. I told her that my medical record now accurately reflected what had happened, and that my account no longer carried permissions I had not granted. That was the extent of it. After we hung up, I drove to a new pharmacy closer to my office and transferred all of my prescriptions. The process was straightforward. I filled out a transfer request, showed my ID, and asked that no third-party pickup be permitted under any circumstances. They entered the note into the system while I stood there. The following week, I met with my primary care physician to review my medication plan. We adjusted the dosage to a level consistent with my prior treatment and confirmed that my chart no longer reflected conflicting strengths. For the first time since that Thursday night in the ER, the numbers aligned. At home, I reorganized the small basket on the top shelf of my cabinet. The new bottle sat there, properly labeled with the pharmacy receipt, folded neatly behind it. I also updated my legal paperwork. I removed Claire from my emergency contact and medical proxy forms and listed a close friend instead. I emailed copies to my physician's office and kept a printed set in my file drawer. These were administrative steps. Quiet, unremarkable, but they were deliberate. Family dinners became less frequent. Invitations were more formal. Conversations stayed surface level. We did not revisit the investigation. There was nothing left to debate. The board's order remained part of the public record. My medical chart remained accurate. The pharmacy's procedures were changed. The outcome was not dramatic. It was documented. And in that documentation, I recovered something I had almost lost in the ER intake room weeks earlier. Authority over my own information. If you've ever had to choose between keeping peace and keeping the record straight, I'd be interested to hear how you handled it. You're welcome to share your experience below. And if stories like this matter to you, you can follow along for the next one. Sometimes justice is quiet, but it still counts.